Hey, teachers, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at in the world. I'm here in Rio de Janeiro, and today I'm starting a new series where I ask people to ask me questions so I can actually get off my rear end to do some videos. So today is going to be the first in that series, and I've got a question here from Read with Lolly. Here it is. The question Read with Lolly asks, I would love a video on helping me teach my older students the correct intonations. I'm repeating it, trying to stress the correct way. Any advice other than just repeating it? Thanks, Mr. Linguist. I guess the pressure's on for me now to sound smart and use big words. So I'm going to actually look at this in three different parts, three different levels, so to speak. So let's take a look. First, the one that I've used the most and I advocate the most is this first one here, the horse riding method. And then second, if you have a kid that's more focused, the word marking method. And then finally, the letters and numbers, which I'm not a huge fan of myself. I don't think I would use it, but just to make sure all of you are feeling satisfied. If you have a student that really likes to have a specific strategy and learn all about it, then that might be a solution for you. So let's take a look. First level, level 1, horse riding. And very much so, you essentially get the kid to ride the horse. Simple as that. So a sentence like this: I like to learn about teaching languages. I like to learn about teaching languages. Now it's really important the physicality and them feeling intonation. So you have to nag them to move. You say, yeah, you with your hand. I like to learn about teaching languages. And get them to do that movement with you. It's very important so they can feel that some syllables are stronger than others. That's really what it's about, is opening their mind to that idea. Because, for example, Chinese learners, Spanish speakers, all the languages in their, all the syllables in their language are the same length and same strength and same pitch, everything. So in English, we have to introduce them to the fact this is called a stress-timed language. However, you can't try to teach them everything, right? So this horse riding method at least sort of introduces them in a very fun, intuitive, simple way that they can utilize. The con being that it's not really accurate. For example, they won't sound natural, but they'll sound more natural, right? If I speak like this the whole time, it sounds very robotic. If I speak like this the whole time, it might sound a little bit unnatural, but it's better than just speaking like this the whole time. You get it? See, stress-timed versus syllable-timed languages. So that's the first step. I'd really encourage you to use this one. This is the one that I use. I think it's the most effective. Now, if you have a really focused student, right? A student that would like a strategy, you want them to sound even more natural, right? Take them to the next step. We're going to go to level 2 here. This is where you mark the important words in the sentence, okay? So what you do is you and the student get together, and you could ask the student very simply, what are the important words in this sentence? And you just kind of let them choose. Or perhaps if you sense that they wouldn't be able to answer that question, you can go ahead and just mark some of the words yourself. Like this technique involves you and the student marking important words in the text and putting emphasis on those words. And so then what you do is you get them to use their hand. Physicality is everything in emphasizing. So to answer Read with Loli's question, she just kind of has them repeat. The key is to give them some sort of gesture to do with their hands. And so I personally like more natural gestures versus like, pounding with the fist or pointing is not so natural, but these are options. You can go, this technique involves you and the student, helping them feel the strength of that syllable. I'm going to show you an article here momentarily that will encourage you to use gestures to get them to notice different parts of how strong syllables are emphasized differently. For example, we don't just put more volume into the syllable, we actually raise the pitch on syllables. This technique involves you and the student, and so you get them to raise their hand to raise the pitch. You can also have them grab an elastic rubber band. You can actually grab a rubber band yourself, pull it, and then encourage them to do it. This technique involves you and the student marking important words. You have them feel it kind of stretching, right? So those are some things you can do. I personally like to just use natural gestures. That's what I've done in my experience. So you'd say this technique involves you and the student marking important words in the text and putting emphasis on those words. Okay, so that's one option for you to take that will be more accurate than the horse riding method, because we don't always talk like this the whole time, stressed and unstressed, stressed and unstressed. We have a very dynamic pattern in English. More on that later. And make sure that you're using those physicalization techniques. That's what's going to really make it salient for them to feel that. Okay, so I gave you a few. Now, how would you approach this, right? You don't necessarily want to just put this all on their lap. So what I'd recommend that you do is, as the teacher, model this here. You'll go ahead and say, what are the important words? And then you'll mark over those words, and then give them a try on the next activity. Okay, your turn. What are the important words? And then have them draw or have them say them, right? So they're probably going to naturally tend towards like, well, you is important, or use. It's up to them, really. So this is one of the drawbacks, but it gets them involved in a more interactive way. So they'll probably mark physicalization, techniques, help is important, the student, feel, whatever that might be. And the point that you're getting across is that some words we emphasize more than others. That's really at the heart of what's a stress-timed language like English, is that we kind of highlight the important words in the sentence. And so by asking them this question, you're getting them involved in the activity. It's not always going to be 100% right. Like if we were to really mark this sentence according to the rules of how we would emphasize it, we'd say you can use physicalization techniques. So we say you can use physicalization techniques to help the student feel the strength, length, or pitch of strong syllables. You notice how sometimes it's da-da, 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 and sometimes you have multiple strong syllables. Feel the strength, length, that you actually emphasize two in a row. So I would encourage you to just ask them this question, not for them to mark everything, but just what are the important words, so they can start to feel what's called phrase, having a strong syllable within the phrase, not just the word level. When you're working at the word level, that's great to kind of show them, okay, congratulations, give them a physicalization on the word. But the problem is in English, once the word is put into a phrase, it's not going to have the same type of stress. So it's good to show them always in context. So another preface to doing this type of work with a student is you'd always want to do it embedded in some type of communicative activity like this right here. We have context. We're not just pulling out random words, because words behave quite differently when they're actually in context. So keep that in mind. You'd want to always keep it in context. Try to keep the activity still communicative. Don't deviate so much time doing this, but this is something that you could do. Just ask, what are the important words? Underline them or put some of these dashes on there. And then when you get to those, have them use their hand to feel those words a little bit stronger. And then as they get better and better, you can maybe encourage them to say, okay, let's on the words like in the, we don't need to say fast. In the, fast. So student marking important words in the text. Encourage to say, these are fast. Maybe in the future. But really, back to what I mentioned earlier in the preface, I don't think a lot of these explicit intervention techniques are doing a lot of good long term. So I'm not a big fan of using this a lot in class. I'd stick more to the horse riding technique from earlier, or just very simply asking them what words are important, and then encouraging them to emphasize those words using a natural gesture with two hands, or with one hand, or with hands up like this. I like to keep the gestures a little bit more natural. So those are the two techniques that I'd really advocate, that I've actually used in my experience. The cool part about this word marking approach is that it will approximate more natural language. Because we don't speak like this all the time, we tend to emphasize the most important words of our sentence so they jump out at you, and then we minimize the weak syllable stress and kind of pack them all together. So this will be a little bit more accurate, sound a little bit more natural. The only problem is when you ask the student what are the important words, it's actually very subjective. So it's not going to be a very scientific approach, but I think it's the best to get them involved in some way so you're not losing that communicative element. I would never want to put the lesson on hold, for example, just so I could do a little lesson on intonation. For me, that's a little counterintuitive. I'd rather always keep it communicative. So those are the two that I'd advocate. Now, if you really are with one of those students that you know they like to learn about the language, you might like linguistics, for example. We're now starting to go into territory of not teaching English, but teaching the linguistics of English, okay? So that's why when we come to level 3, I'd be very, very cautious about applying this, especially you'd never want to go in with the idea that they need to know this, that they would ever be tested on this, or that they need to speak exactly like this. And so level 3 are letter and number rhythms. And I'm going to share with you an article here. There it is. Article which is called Practical Approaches and Strategies for Teaching Stress-Timed English Rhythm. And this article basically argues we can't be teaching them just the horse riding method because it's not 100% accurate, as we've already discussed. So we should teach them the dynamic rhythms that are involved in English. So again, I'm going to preface before we get into this next piece, don't try to get the student to execute this perfectly. This is just kind of a curiosity that, oh, by the way, this is interesting. You would also only want to use this, in my view, with repeat students. Like this, to try to teach somebody the dynamic rhythms of English in one class is not going to work. So you have to be with a student that you're going to see multiple times, and then maybe you can bring this to them attention. So the letters and numbers strategy, level 3, the more complex of the 3, basically says there are 2 patterns in English. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Notice how all those syllables are stressed. And then we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Those are the 2 patterns of English. Because we're not always da-da, 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It's not always horse riding. Sometimes we emphasize every syllable. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So you kind of introduce them to that. One way Kaiser, the author of this article, suggests is that if it's with a higher level student, for example, you might even bring to their attention that we have stress timed languages like English, and that English is different from other languages. Languages like Chinese, languages like Spanish. Donde está la casa de tu madre? So you can see A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. It's all kind of the same time, same strength, same duration, same pitch. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Whereas in English, we have a tendency to have stress timed, where some words have more length, strength, and pitch than others. Stresses are the way to figure the rhythm of a phrase. You can feel it's kind of has a rhythm to it. So Kaiser presents a lot of physicalizations to help them feel this when you present it. Pointing is one. Stresses are the way to figure the rhythm of a phrase. Another way is to take a piece of paper and a pen, and you can actually dot them out. Stresses are the way to figure the rhythm of a phrase. And then afterwards, the student can actually count the dots. In my view, that's a little complex. That would be for pretty advanced students to do that. In an online environment, instead of dotting on the paper, you could have them draw on the screen. I think that might be difficult. You might have them use their fingers. Stresses are the way to figure the rhythm of a phrase. And then they can go back and check. Okay, 5, did I get 5? Okay, I got all 5 of those emphases. So you can do the fingers. There's also another one where you do the rubber band, right, to feel the length. Stresses are the way to figure the rhythm of a phrase. So they can feel the length of those stress syllables. There's also the raising hand that Kaiser recommends. So now you're focusing on the pitch. Stresses are the way to figure the rhythm of a phrase. And then finally, if you want to get more fluency and rhythm, then you can do this rocking motion towards your chest. Stresses are the way to figure the rhythm of a phrase, and try to get them to feel that it's a constant, consistent, rhythmic, regular motion that we stress the syllables and then kind of compact the weak syllables. So as you can see, you might already be overloaded yourself. Now imagine a learner of a foreign language, you trying to go over all these different things. So you'll take an example like this, get them to physicalize it in various ways. You might even start to listen in on what are their issues. Are they doing it too choppy? They're not putting enough time on that syllable stress. You might have them stretch the rubber band. Are they just not getting the volume enough? You might have them point, or in my view, I like to use more naturalistic gestures, like just a hand coming down or two hands. You could also, back to what we talked about earlier, if it's just not flowing, you can encourage them to feel this. But these are pretty advanced techniques. To explicitly feel this is very difficult, okay? So that's one activity you can do, is just get them to feel the differences in the syllables. And then you start to establish, okay, this is A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Mark bought that big old blue couch. And then you actually encourage them to see that we don't always have the horse riding rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, but we sometimes mix the two in English. So as you can see in this example, Pat's not sure why. You can say that's an A, B, C, D rhythm. She has to go to the store. She has to go to the store with the dumb dog. And now you can see again, we have an A, B, C rhythm here with that dumb dog. And so Kaiser, when you're working with these higher level students, more advanced students, you can start to encourage them to see that, sometimes we have A, B, C, D rhythms, that ba, 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 and sometimes we have the da, 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And start to open their mind up to the fact that English is not just a very canned solution. You can't just say it's horse riding. It's a good way to get started, but it's not 100% accurate, as we've already talked about. There's a mix of A, B, C, D, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so you can show them charts or examples like this. And one thing that I like that Kaiser mentions is that it's good in this case to actually break this up into pieces. You wouldn't want the learner to be working with a piece of language like that. You'd want to break it up into smaller pieces that they can work on, right? Last night, A, B, my big brother and I. And now you're using the and the AB. So certainly this is not for novices. This is for, and by the way, this is for a student that is going to be more focused. As far as getting them to apply the strong syllables, again, this is where I'm not really on board with Kaiser at this point. This is just kind of FYI. I'm going to give you the link to this article so you can check it out yourself. This would be just for your most studious students that love linguistics, that love to learn how it works and all this stuff, that you could then show them these kind of things that, well, some words are more important than others. The content words, for example. We have nouns, verbs, adjective, adverbs, etc. Question words, negatives. These get stressed. And then there's the weak function words, articles, prepositions, pronouns, conjunctions. Can you imagine you're learning a foreign language and you're having to keep track of these things in your mind when you're already overloaded? So I personally am not a big fan of monitoring all these things, but Kaiser recommends that one way you could approach this to give them a strategy is this bottom-up strategy that you're seeing here, to recognize certain words and then mix that with a top-down strategy that basically says, well, in general, longer words will be stressed and shorter words will not. And then you kind of memorize a list of the short words that still receive stress, like have, had, add. And so then you can use these two strategies coming together. But just kind of reflecting on that, are you not already feeling overwhelmed by this? So for me personally, as a language teacher, in my view, I'm in the position of the camp of let's make these activities communicative and let the language acquisition take its natural course, because I question how much we're really contributing as teachers with all of these explicit interventions to their rate of acquisition, their fluency, their accuracy, their ultimate attainment of acquisition. This certainly will only work with certain learning styles as well. So I'm not really on board with getting that complex. The good parts of this letters and numbers strategy, in my view, is that it's a simple analogy, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Versus 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It builds on something they know. It's very intuitive. But I think when it comes time to actually apply it and figure out when syllables are stressed, that's where it really just falls to pieces. The rules are too complex. And at the end of the day, you learn all these rules and it's not going to be 100% effective. It's going to be very time consuming. It'll take away from the flow and the vibe of the lesson. And for me, when I'm doing my lessons, it's all about keeping it communicative, keeping it fun, keeping the interactions genuine. If you get too much into the weeds with this stuff, you might just find that the lesson's going to take on another vibe. It's not going to be nearly as fun. And I think at the end of the day, you're not going to make lots of long-term progress with all of these explicit interventions. So there it is. Wow, oh my goodness, a 20-minute video. I can't believe I've been talking for so much time. I can't believe that you're actually still watching this, to be honest. So here are the 3 levels of working with intonation. Horse riding, the one that I use and recommend. Word marking, if you're working with a more advanced student, actually encourage them to mark the words. Use these physicalization techniques, the horse riding, to just open their eyes up and their minds up to the idea that some syllables have more stress than others. The word marking to kind of get them to feel that we're emphasizing some words in a sentence and not others, and that we want to get to those important words faster and let them stretch out. I gave you lots of physicality exercises. I'm going to put a link in the chat box with that document that has all those exercises broken down, and with more theoretical discussion as well if you'd like to take a look, where you can also learn more about level 3, the letters and numbers strategy, where you actually introduce them to the dynamic rhythms of English. Again, I'm not really a fan of going that deep. I hope that you enjoyed this experience today as much as I did. I learned a lot. I hope you learned a lot. And if you have any questions, I think I'm getting myself into some hot water by just putting it out there. Ask me some questions on YouTube so I can get off my rear end and actually make some videos. But I guess it worked today. So if you have any questions about this video or anything else, leave a question in the comments, or you can send me a direct message here on YouTube, and I would love to help you out. This is what I do. This is my passion, and we're not just teaching these kids words and sentences. We are inspiring them with a lifelong love of intercultural connection and a passion for learning, and that might just follow them the rest of their days. So thank you once again for watching, and until next time, happy teaching.